The racial divide in this country is at an all-time high. We can't seem to escape the ongoing debate regarding whose life really matters. Do Black lives matter? Do all lives matter? Is racism real or just a ploy from the powers that be? We are experiencing the culmination of over 4 centuries of oppression of Black people. The cry for justice, equality, and understanding is louder than it's ever been. But is it still falling on deaf ears? The truth is, people are waking up. Non-people of color are discovering the privilege that they possess and were unaware of how it's been utilized in their life. After all, privilege kills empathy. So once one identifies they have it, it opens the pathway to feel what another is feeling. A new lens is opened and a world of possibilities begins to emerge. The big question is, how do we lean into the uncomfortable conversations? How do we find the harmony, unity, and understanding we so desperately need to coexist and thrive together? And above all, what's love got to do with it? We'll explore all of this on today's show. Welcome to An Unconditional Life. And here we are. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Joe Italic, your host, and today is an important one, especially in light of what we see and are experiencing in the world today. You know, this show is called An Unconditional Life, meaning living your life without any conditions. It is uninhibited, wholehearted, a complete life. And I would say that, especially with the guest that I'm bringing on, I wonder if she thinks about, do I live my life with conditions? And so it's an interesting thing to explore. With the racial divide that we are experiencing, not just in America, but very vividly, but really across the world. We want to focus in on what we're experiencing in our own country. And I have a guest today who is absolutely the right person that I want to have that conversation with. And I want to give an opportunity just to share a little bit about who you're going to hear from today. So Marla Mason is a published author from San Diego, California. And she grew up in a very spiritual home with both of her parents and 2 brothers. Marla was involved in sports for the majority of her life, but she has found her passion really in poetry and writing today. Marla's work, it really focuses on being a source of inspiration for those that have yet to explore their own truth. She's a firm believer that we all go through hardships in life and that each of us has a unique story to tell. She does reside in Southern California, where she raises her family and hopes to motivate change within her own community. And one of the reasons why I brought Marla on is I love her and she's exquisite. And she through Instagram, she sent me a message and we had this very cool conversation, in that message. And I want to take an opportunity to actually highlight it. This was actually during Ahmaud Arbery and what happened with him when he was killed during a time that he was just out jogging. And I'm going to change my glasses to my daddy glasses. Did I just say I'm a daddy? But anyhow, they're a little crooked, but they work. But I'm going to share with you what she said. And I will tell you that my empathic gifts that I have were very vivid that day, as they are right now in this moment. So Marla wrote me and she said, even the first verse, "I'm tired, Joe. When will they stop killing us?" I gave her a little comment and she said, "It's egregious. The amount of preparedness that goes into being raised Black in America. We all know what to say to police officers, to control our emotions, to keep perceptions upright. But it doesn't matter anymore. The idea of Blacks in America has never changed, just the social platforms have. There has been no progress when we are gunned down and the world continues without action or remorse. What if this person's loved one gives birth to a half Black American and they are gunned down? Will they care then? Does it matter then? It'll be too late for corrective action. If this doesn't stop, Joe, it's going to get ugly. Too many of us are tired. Too many of us will throw caution and sensibility out of the window. It's infuriating. I said a few things and she continued with, first of all, thank you for showing up and being an ally. It's important to know who will stand with you when it's unpopular and uncomfortable. So thank you. And then she says, I believe that racism is the root cause. I believe that's being quietly allowed in affluent circles. I believe that white America has not held other white Americans accountable for their belief systems or for their actions. The nation was built on the belief that Black slaves were comparable to livestock. We were property. So the mindset has never been that white racism affected people, but rather subhumans. This rationale has allowed whites to feel naturally superior. Let's not start to add negative propaganda of Blacks into the media and social platforms in that time. Once the Black man and woman were finally free, they were already criminalized and dehumanized. No chance. No chance at being truly equal to other humans. This is systemic, and the root is embedded further back than slavery. I feel that I lost my place here. And slavery. I feel that social platforms ignite the flame. I also feel that my community is waiting on a leader to follow because we really don't truly know where to start. But I don't think that's the answer. She said, I believe that my community needs to look within, find their purpose within themselves, understanding discipline on all levels of and all aspects. This is when we will shout victory and regain our pride and heritage. Until then, we are playing into a system. We are declining emotionally, mentally, physically in so many ways. Now, I don't want to steal Marla's thunder, but I would suppose that that's just an amazing jumping off point for our conversation. So I want to bring on and welcome to An Unconditional Life, Marla Mason. All right. Marla, thank you so much for being here today. And I didn't tell you I was going to read that. I'm not sure. Yeah. I hope that's okay, because I looked at it and I said, there's so much truth in this. I really want to bring this forth as a jumping point. And then when I realized that it wasn't when George Floyd was killed, this was in early May when we had that exchange, and then ironically, yesterday, you know me and some of the music that I have an affinity towards. And so I'll go back in the day and play things that kind of anchors me. Mm-hmm. And so I put on an old, this is, back in before 2000, it had to be in the late 90s. But it was, of course, a Kirk Franklin. Don't laugh because people just know I'm obsessed with him. An album, and one of the interludes was this mom who was crying out saying, that's my son. That's my son. And it's like, oh my gosh, how appropriate for me to say, this is just not happening today. And that's part of the conversation, is that, there's some heightened awareness to it, but it's not new.
It's not new.
Yeah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I don't want to steal all your thunder. So what I want to talk about today is really your take on the racial divide, racism, what you're experiencing as a Black woman. And also, I think it's important to raise some of the questions that I know I'm experiencing from some of my really good friends who have awakened to the fact like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this idea of white privilege I possess. I actually have it and I was unaware of it. And in their desire to want to help, some are stuck because I'm not sure what to do and am I doing it right, etc. So the idea of being, an effective ally. So talking about that, and then something that you mentioned in terms of inner work. And I know that my lane in life. I know, my mission is to be a source of harmony, radical acceptance, and love without condition. So you and I have both experiencing those things that afforded us the opportunity to look inwardly. So the inner work is absolutely important. So touching on that, and then talk about some of the things that you're doing to heighten the awareness in your own community. And then we're going to talk about the books that I have, both of them, talk a little bit about the inspiration behind those. Okay, so that's kind of the framework of what we'll talk about. So I just want to just hand it over to you and just, just share with those that are watching what you're experiencing and some of your thoughts of what's happening right now as we're all experiencing, vividly, right, what this has brought to the surface.
Yes. So thank you, Joe, for the invite and having me on today. For those of you listening and watching, I think it's very important for you to listen without preconceived notions, to listen without your own personal perception and be open to the perception of others. I think that's going to be the biggest shift that people can have, is to understand that gaining perspective is going to be the biggest way to not only understand the situation, to become an ally, and to actually invoke change. So that's my ask of you listening today. My experience as a Black woman in America it's been interesting to say the least. When I look at cases like Ahmaud Arbery, like George Floyd, like Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, I think it's a multi-layered side for me. I am a mother. And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing. The fear of not knowing if your child is coming home. And you have to one day prep them to be ready for an encounter with police. It's huge. It's a very unnerving, it's a very uncomfortable feeling, but it's a feeling that almost is hummed in the background of your soundtrack of life. I have been profiled, I have been followed, I have been, stared at, and it's simply because of the color of my skin. And so when you explain this to children, it doesn't make sense. They don't understand how someone that they now know in their childhood can grow up and eventually see them in a negative light, even though they've never done anything to promote this negative light. And so that's what the adult version of this is. We're all walking around and we have these preconceived notions and these preconceived ideas of individuals around us that's perpetuated by media, instead of actually having these true, authentic interactions. For me, as you mentioned to the viewers, I grew up in Southern California. I have two parents in the household, very good background, very good upbringing. I'm a college graduate. I've actually worked in PD, in a police department where I was a police officer. That was for the federal government. During this time, I was actually arrested and put into general population.
When you were a police officer?
Yes. And they saw my credentials. They saw all my information. I was pulled over because I had bad registration, and it wasn't on my end. It was a vehicle that I had bought from a dealership, and the dealership never transferred the license from the other state. And so I was stuck with a registration I couldn't pay, but I still needed to get to work and I still needed to do what I needed to do. So that was the basis of how that happened. The officer was upset because I didn't move fast enough, and I chose not to take a ride with an officer. And so he decided that he was going to arrest me, and he did. And I went to jail for that. And so it puts things into perspective. You know my background, you know who I am. Not a violent person. I'm not a belligerent person. I am I'm very calm. I actually came out of the arrest with injuries. And so it makes you understand and see. For me, it didn't matter that I graduated from one of the best schools in the country at UCSD. It didn't matter that I was a star athlete when I played basketball in college. It didn't matter that I had a child. It didn't matter that I had a good job. None of it mattered, because in that moment I was a Black woman not moving fast enough at the officer's discretion. And so he decided to arrest me. I remember getting home that night and breaking down because of the wall that you have to have up in the entire process. You don't want them to see that you're going to cry. You don't want them to see that you're angry. You don't want them to see any emotion. And so you hold in all of these things. And so I released it once I got home, and I was talking to my mother, had came over to my apartment. I said, "Mom, it doesn't matter." And I think that's in that moment it clicked for me. It doesn't matter any of the accolades that I've had, anybody that I know who could or could not be connected as far as, to the police department and having power. When I'm out in public by myself, driving around in the city of San Diego, I can still be arrested and thrown in jail for something as minor as registration. Imagine what the reaction is to someone who has robbed or is accused of robbing, or who is accused of being fraudulent with a payment. Imagine how heightened the action of the officer comes when they feel as though you're a threat to society, because now we can prove it. It's deadly. And we've seen that overwhelmingly over and over and over. For me, the breaking point was Ahmaud Arbery, when a gentleman is jogging in a neighborhood that he's quote unquote not supposed to be in a free country, and he gets gunned down by a three-man militia. And nobody did anything. So it goes to show you that the value of Black lives has been reduced to that of emotion. It's how you're feeling that day depends on how my life is going to turn out. So let's understand, when you get arrested, it goes onto your file. It goes onto a federal file. It goes onto a state file. If you go for a job, that job is going to look up your information, and they're going to ask you, why were you arrested? Even if the infraction was as small as, officer, I can't move any faster, or no, I don't want to ride with you. It's affecting your life. And so you can only imagine what that does to people who do wind up getting felonies or misdemeanors, or who are arrested and they miss their shift at work. And because they didn't show up to work, they no longer have a job. It's detrimental. It's not just, oh, they got arrested, they'll be fine. No, it's detrimental because it is systemic. It's a flow that goes in the same consistency, right? So when you talk about ebb and flow, you talk about things flowing in a certain direction. And for people of color, it only perpetuates, right? Because now, let's say you do get arrested and you miss your shift at work. Now you're looked at as the Black person who missed their shift at work, and you're lazy, so I don't want you working here anymore, right? There goes your job. What about your bills and your landlord? Oh, even if you paid everything on time, oh, well, I don't know if you can miss this one time, right? Because now oh, you don't have a job, oh, you're not stable. When that's not the case at all. You're extremely stable. You just had an incident that happened that was unfortunate, and you're trying to correct it. But if you never get the footing to actually correct things, the slope gets real slippery, really fast, really, really fast. And so that's been my experience. And I feel as though I'm on the good side. I'm on the lucky side. I'm on the, at least I'm still here, alive and thriving side.
Yeah.
Imagine the people that don't have the support or who don't have the wherewithal to control their emotions, to be in the right place at the right time, to know the right people, and it's overwhelming. I think that's the best way to express it. It's overwhelming. And because it's taught socially, it's taught educationally, it's ingrained in so many of us and in our lives that we see it as normal, right? The
Yeah.
misuse and mistreatment of
Right.
Black people. It's just, that's how it is. And that's how you get people of color
Right.
hating Black people.
Right.
And that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. So gosh, there's just whew, it does, I think, for many, and maybe I just speak for myself, when you know someone personally, right? And in this case, and then when your brother was on, on one of your lives on Instagram and he shared
Yeah.
his experience, was I was not aware of. And I know him personally.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have to hear that to understand, but it
Right.
hit home when you
Yeah.
know someone of the character that you guys have.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to unpack, and I want to touch in on two of them.
Perfect.
So as you started to share that, beginning to have conversations with your beautiful children, little mini Marlas, to your recollection, what was the first time that you knew and discovered, oh, this game is going to be different for me?
As far as raising them, right?
As far as your own experience as a young Black person. So, right. So
I was 14.
mm-hmm.
I was 14. I was walking down the street from a friend's house back to where we lived. And I heard a vehicle behind me, but I'm 14. I'm not going to turn around, And so I hear a guy scream out the window and he says, hey, you. Now for me, because unfortunately at 13 and 14, especially Black women, we are hypersexualized. So I'm thinking that it's just some guy, right, doing a cat call. I'm not turning around. Absolutely not. And so he continues, says, hey, you, I'm talking to you. And the car speeds up a little bit to where out of my peripheral, I could see the front portion of the car. So that's when I knew, oh, that's a police officer. So I stopped and I turned around and he says, why didn't you respond when I called you? And in my head, right, because I know my parents have prepped me, don't say anything smart to the police. Don't, just whatever they ask you, just give them a straightforward answer. Don't be snide. Don't be slick. And so I said, I didn't know who you were, because he never addressed who he was. He says, have you seen, and he gives me a description of a man I guess he was looking for. And the man that he described was a Black man. And I said, no, I haven't. And he says, you wouldn't lie to me, would you? I'm 14 years old, talking to a police officer. There's no way I would lie, And I said, no, I wouldn't lie to you. And he says, I better not find out you were lying, or I will find you. That's 14. And that was my very first encounter where I was like, maybe I should stay away from them. Maybe they're not here to do what they said they're here to do, when they come to the schools and say, we're here to help you and support you. That was my first instance. And I understood even then at 14 that not every cop is a bad cop. I understood then that not every person is a bad person. But that interaction was so abrasive that it kind of prepped me for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, in the work that I do, I know that there's always connections to our childhood, our inner child. And I started to think about, Black people, where some of that is not just from family, but it is the idea of experiencing very, very young. And as you know, we hear so many stories of even younger than that experiencing those types of things.
Right.
Very, very scarring for sure.
Yeah.
There's other things that you had said that I really wanted to actually help me as well. I had a conversation just last night with one of my best friends in Orange County.
Mm.
And I was helping him actually with a conversation that he was having with his own son. And it was very political. And so we talked, and I wanted to check in on him. So I reached out to him, and he says, it's been tough. We're in a divide. And now with all this racial stuff, it's just even. And so that was my cue. We're at the racial stuff. I'm like, well, what do you mean? So we started to have a conversation, and he said he didn't understand the privilege part.
Okay.
Right. And I said, really? And mind you, he's not white. He's a person of color. So, and when I say person of color, he is from the islands. And so I said, well, help me understand, what you don't see. He goes, well, whose responsibility is it? The person who gives a privilege or the person who receives it to help out in all this? And I was like, okay. So there was one trigger. I was like,
Right.
So I had to watch it. I want to have a conversation. I want to foster this. And then I said, well, it's systemic. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Okay. I said, we see it in institutions, in systems that we adopt or adapt because it's just a part of how we're programmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes, well, what systems? I said, the government. And then I just started to list these things. He goes, well, give me examples of the government. Who receives benefits, than anybody else? He goes, you mean like food stamps? And I was like, did you just say food stamps?
Yeah.
And I said, so why food stamps? And he said, oh, I'm just curious, is because that's a benefit to pay. And who's it a benefit to? And so I found myself rising up and going, whoa, watch it, Joe. And so I told him, I said, if this is where I think it's going, I said, I don't want to engage in this conversation.
Right.
If you're willing, kind of what you said in the very beginning, to see a perspective and to be open, I'm not going to try and change your mind. That's not the intent of this conversation.
Right.
But he had a really tough time around the idea of systemic racism. So I wanted to see if you could shed light on examples of that. Right. So those that are watching, as well as those who will be watching the replay, can understand how that shows up today.
Oh, that's a very layered question. That's a very, very layered question. Let's talk about. Okay, so we'll start from some of the beginning, I guess you can say. When Blacks were brought, or Africans were brought to this country, okay, they weren't brought over as indentured servants. They weren't brought over as the help. They were brought over as property. And that's how they were used. They were considered 3/5 of a human, okay? They were torn apart from their families. They were sold in different places, whether it was the Caribbean or it was the United States, away from their homeland, took away their religion, took away everything that made them who they were and their identity, so that they would then conform to the identity that was the only option, or die. So once that happened, and once there was a foothold within slavery where this was the norm and people were born into slavery and things like this, that's something that was almost ingrained in who that individual was. There was uprisings, right? There were times where people would fight. We know about Nat Turner and his revolt, but they were all quelled, or they all ended. We can then go from there to when Blacks were freed. And this is the interesting part, because some were offered indentured servitude because they knew nothing, right? They knew nothing else. They had no skills as far as being able to go out and be an engineer or be a lawyer or work in a factory. They didn't have that aptitude, and it wasn't like people were really looking for Black people to work for them. So they kind of had to get in where they fit in. Some went to the north, right, and lived in that way. Let's talk about where policing came from, because this is a very strong system within the United States. Is policing. Policing started as slave patrols.
Mm,
Slave patrols were the men that comprised the slave patrols. I'm sorry, were white men, obviously, but these men were the men who could not. They were not smart enough to be lawyers. They were not smart enough to be doctors. They were not good enough to be any of the roles within society that where you needed a formal education, where you needed background history as far as experience. These were the jobs that the good old boys put together so
mhm,
that there was employment for the ones who really couldn't work. And
right.
so you had what they did was they, after curfew, if you were still out, they would wrangle you up. And that was pretty much it. You didn't have trials, you didn't have due process. That wasn't something that was for you. That's you. The Constitution wasn't written for Black people at all. And so that system, we still see that today, right? Um, Slave patrols were allowed to come into your house and take you in the middle of the night if you were accused of doing something wrong without proof. We still see that today. The symbol for the slave patrol is the same star that sheriffs wear throughout the United States today.
Mhm,
So that in itself, that's one example, right, of it being systemic, of it being ingrained in the fabric of the United States. We then go to legislation. Legislation is not built or written for Black people. There is a caveat in the 13th Amendment. And if you read the doc, or if you watch the documentary on Netflix for the 13th Amendment, you'll clearly see that in there, the caveat is stating that it's saying slavery is no longer a thing in the United States unless you are found criminally guilty of a crime. And that's the caveat. So that's why, even though there's only 13% population of African Americans in the United States, we make up so much of prisons because that is where we are still being funneled and pushed into slavery. So when I tell you that I got arrested off of registration, it starts to make more sense,
right.
right? Why
Mhm,
there's so many avenues for Black Americans to be put into a system that keeps them and holds them down. So that's how the legislation part connects systematically with the policing part.
yeah.
We then can talk about jobs and voting and certain privileges that are all taken away once you have a felony on your record. We can talk about how police detectives interrogate teenagers without parents being present, how they offer plea deals that are beyond the scope of the crime, right? And how people then get kind of suckered in because they don't know the law. Okay, I'll plead guilty, not knowing that it's going to get them a felony and it's going to mess up their opportunities in life and it's going to keep them down for the rest of their lives. These are all parts of the system that work cohesively together to work against the Black community. We talk about the war on crime, the war on drugs. We talk about crack in the neighborhoods. We talk about defunding of education in the 70s. 1970s is when the population of the prisons increased exponentially. And so it's all working in a system so that the majority of this 13% is held down. Are
Right.
there some that are able to maybe quote unquote pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right?
Mhm,
Um, and be successful in life? There are. Is there enough? No. And I
right.
heard an analogy that was very perfect for this. It's as if you're playing Monopoly, and for 400 years, you work, right? You play the game, you play it right, you do everything you're supposed to do, but you cannot own property.
Mm,
Every penny that you make is given to the person running the game. Every opportunity that you have has to be okayed by the person running the game.
mm,
Finally, after those 400 years, you say, okay, whew, okay, now I have a chance, right? But then when you start to build, that person running the game wipes all of your houses off the table, like in Tulsa, when we had Black Wall Street, like in Rosewood. Everything gets wiped out and they tell you you have to start over and you have to rebuild. But then they sprinkle things like crack in your community. They claim a war on drugs, which is simply a war on Black people. And then you're told to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But we don't have anything.
Right.
Everything we've tried to do has been ravished and taken.
Right.
You see? And so
Absolutely.
it's all a system and it all works together. I mean, I hope that answered your question or part
It
of
does. Yeah. And we see it in education, we see it in the corporate world. There's just so many examples.
So many examples.
There is sentiments. I'm just being a parrot and not my belief, but when people say, well, you know what? Blacks are just plain victims. What's your response to that?
I would say to that, because in my personal journey right now, my goal is to not take things personally. So I would say to that, reverse it. Put yourself in my shoes. Would you like it? Would you enjoy being Black in America? If you had an option to pick a life and a lifestyle, would you pick that of a Black person? And if you internally would say, oh no, why would I do that? Then you know the problem and you know the answers. Yes. And you feel every single ounce of that question.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's just vivid right now. That's very powerful. Really quickly, Marla, I just wanted to acknowledge those that are watching. I see your amazing comments and engagement in the chat. When we have time, I'm going to go back and pull out some questions. So please bear with us as we continue this important conversation. I want to switch over now into what I had mentioned in terms of those who are identifying privilege. And they have a desire to, and kind of this reconciliation and to resolve that. Oh my gosh, you know, some show up with kind of guilty. Some show up like relieved, almost like, oh my gosh, I can see now, you know. And I think there's been some really cool effort that I see, you know, happening. In fact, the conversation that I had last night with my friend, you know, I said, my own belief is that it's important for the white community to show up, not just in reposting memes and, you know, not that that's bad or anything, but show up in your voice and your actions, correct things in the moment, etc. He goes, well, I think that's happening. I said, no. Let me give you an example. I said, with all the protests that you're seeing today, what city stands out to you where it was like a massive amount of people? And he said, LA. I said, what if that march was all white people, no other color except that, and they were saying Black Lives Matter, equality. We see now, we see you, we stand with you, we will fight for you. What impact would that have? He goes, that would be truly powerful. Right. I said, that's the possibilities and the impact. So for those who are really, I have some good friends. I think I see Gwen on here, and also Renee, a good friend of mine, are just how can I do, or, you know, how can I help? Right. So speak to those who have this desire to be effective, knowing that some of them are sensitive as well, because they're going, am I doing the right thing? Should I say this, not say this? If I say it wrong, now I'm going to be gun shy, right? So they're experiencing all those things. So if you could speak to that from your perspective, that would be amazing.
Of course. To those who have chosen to be allies, thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being you, being authentic and being genuine. I'm going to give you guys an analogy. So imagine you're a child and you go to school, and every day you go to school, there's a bully, and that bully takes your lunch money every day. And you haven't told your parents, you haven't told an adult, nothing, but you're like, I'm hungry all the time, right? Oh, my belly is burning by the time I get home every day. The bully takes your lunch money. So then I pose a question to you. Is it the person who's getting bullied's responsibility to say to the bully, "Hey, you're bullying me. Knock it off"? Is it someone who sees the bullying to say, "Hey, leave him alone and stand up for that person"? So I pose that question, right? And you have an answer. I'm sure you have an answer in your head. We're going to continue with the analogy. So let's say that it's been a week. It's been like 2 weeks, and you haven't had any lunch. Eventually, as a person being bullied, right? Because you've pleaded and you asked him, "Stop bullying me. This hurts. Please knock it off." You stay silent. You don't fight back. You show restraint. You don't say anything to anybody, but you have this burning in your stomach because you want to eat just as much as the bully eats. Eventually, you're going to find the courage to punch the bully in the nose so the bully can feel an impact in which you feel. This is a natural response. It's not the answer to violence. It's not me saying go out, right, and beat the bully up. That's not what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah,
But as
absolutely.
a person, right, who's being bullied, you're in a situation, obviously, that you cannot get yourself out of, or else you would have done it a long time ago.
Right.
So let's say that the person being bullied is the Black community. Let's say the bully is systemic racism within America. And everyone in America is watching. And no one has stopped the bully.
Oof.
Are you going to stand up and stop the bully? Are you going to join with your friends and stop the bully? That is the only way that this can happen. It is not on the weight of the oppressed to stop the oppressor. That's not how that works. It is impossible. We have tried. We have come peacefully, and they killed Martin. We have tried. We have rallied. That was the Black Panthers, and they put them all in jail. Malcolm X is dead. And so what we now are doing is fighting back. We found the courage to fight back. And the only way that we actually can beat the bully and stop the bully is for other allies in America watching to stand up and say this is enough. And I think we are at that point. I think that we are at the precipice of that point. And I think that we will get through this. As an ally, I ask that you just be authentically yourself. Easier said than done in a situation like this that can be daunting. But you have to remember that more than anything else, we are human, that it is our responsibility to show up for each other and say, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to go about this, but I'm here. I see you. I stand with you. I fight with you. And in that itself shows the Black community that you are willing to make the necessary steps for change. I can tell you go and do research and find the books and understand the Black experience. I could tell you go out and protest. I could tell you go write a book about it. Go talk to whoever you want to talk about. But at the end of the day, it has to be authentically yourself that chooses to stand in the gap where the Black community cannot stand. And so showing up to say I'm here, to saying I stand with you is huge. Showing up to the polls to change whoever that police chief is in your district is huge. Showing up to say, hey, I see you guys are out here voting. Let me bring you guys some cold water. Let me do this for you. Let me try to help you in this way. It's the littlest things that's going to actually make the movement of movement. And so what I say to you is, yes, if there's conversations in the room, right, where there are no Black people, and it is It's derogatory towards the Black community. Stand up, say something. You're not right. That's not right. That's a very racist statement you just made. I don't condone it. I don't want to hear it. I think that's the biggest way that you'll start to change minds is when you can defend the person or the community that is not in the room when their name or their community comes up. That's when you have to choose change. That's when you have to choose the right thing. And I explain to my kids all the time, surface level, this is a color thing. This is a skin color thing. But ultimately, internally, this is a right and wrong issue.
Right.
If you stand up for what's right every single time, you're not going to fail. You're not going to fall. No one's going to fault you. No one's going to be upset. No one's going to think you're stepping in the wrong direction or in the wrong way. You just have to be sincere and you have to show up.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's the most simplest thing that I can provide.
That was, as you painted that picture, I thought it was going a certain way, but when you said everyone's watching,
Mm-hmm.
and that hit me. That's a beautiful analogy.
Thank you.
Absolutely vividly on point.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So thank you. I'm managing time here. I'm like, oh, dang, this is going by too fast. I really want to touch on, I believe is important to you as well. And is the idea, and you heard me talk about, this epiphany I had that the other is not the enemy. It is the inner me that needs, it's where I need to pay attention to, at least initially, right? It's important. So talk about that idea of inner work and for everyone, really. Right?
Yeah, inner work is a beautiful thing. Even when you seem to have it all together on the outside, the person that we are without people around is the person that we need to work on. And so what I've come to realize is that in the times that I've thought, oh, I was right, or, I was trying to prove a point, it was my ego that wanted to be fed. And so inner work is huge because that's going to actually allow you to see other people for who they are, for what they can be, and who they are trying to be. I read the Four Agreements a couple weeks ago.
I love that book. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's a life-changing book, by the way. But it is important. The two biggest principles for me was don't take anything personal and never make assumptions. And so when you live simply in that, just in those two things alone, you are able to broaden your perspective. You're able to open your mind up to what's really there and what's not a mirror, what's not this facade. I know that all of us in life have experienced something, whether it was a very traumatic experience as a child, whether it was trauma through your parents maybe divorcing or having really bad relationship or, having issues with, weight or whatever it is. We've all had something that we've had to, we had obstacles we've had to face and overcome. And so with that, we also have to think, where in the past have I created a pattern that maybe makes me feel more comfortable in a situation that I'm uncomfortable in?
Yeah.
Then you'll start to see, this is why you get angry when you don't need to get angry. This is why you hold offense when there's no need to hold offense. And you start to grow in a way that others will notice and they will see. I think inner work is the key to this entire movement, because if we continuously wait for somebody else to do it, it's not going to get done.
Yeah.
The work isn't going to get done. And so for us to do inner work, it solidifies who we are. It solidifies the direction we need to go in and the journey that we're taking. And that in itself promotes change, because if we all do that at one time, we'll all start to connect and move in the same direction.
Yeah, I would say that the inner work just allows you, right, with that searchlight and excavate all those things to look at. Sometimes it's extremely painful. But when we get to that point where we can truly look in the mirror and embrace every parts of us, there's this level of acceptance and love that emerges.
Mm-hmm.
That is when compassion shows up for others. So as you
Absolutely.
talk about the inner work, I would agree wholeheartedly that that is the basis of change,
It is.
right? The idea is that become the change that we want to see in the world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to touch on, because as I'm looking at time, for those that are watching, I don't think we're going to get to any questions, but what I will do is produce the printout of all these and share them with Marla. I'm sure you're sharing some great insights and some good questions, and potentially we may be able to repurpose them in another way. So thank you for participating. At the very bottom, you'll see the banner that, if it feels authentic to you, to follow Marla at Meet Me at the Bridge and M Mason Poetry on Instagram. Really quickly, just touch on Meet Me at the Bridge and why you started that account within Instagram.
So just real quick, after Ahmaud Arbery, I was angry, and I knew there was something I needed to do that was going to be productive versus, I guess, reductive. I needed something that was going to help people see where we were and where we needed to go. And so I created this page where we talk about the Black experience, and we talk about how to be an ally and what that means and how it helps the community, the Black community, but then the collective as a whole. And that's what that is.
Yes, and so typically Marla does a live, as they're scheduled for Sundays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. I've been on several of them. I think I just missed one of them. It's been enlightening to me. She's had an ally on, which is very, very eye-opening. And just the conversation, this just really draws you in. So I definitely wanted to highlight that before we ran out of time today. I do want to talk about your amazing work in your writing and your poetry. Your first book, When My Soul Was Undone. Did I get that right? When My Soul Was Undone.
Yes.
And the second one, which just recently released,
Right.
Self-Love, a 30-day interactive journey.
Yes.
And I called you, or I texted you and said, okay, these questions are just like deep. It does talk about your work in that sense, the inspiration behind that, and then we'll share where people can get a copy of your writing.
Absolutely. So my work started as a cathartic thing for me. I was sexually assaulted when I was 18. And so I had to get through the process somehow. And it took me a while to kind of put a finger on it, but I allowed the release to come through writing. And you see a lot of that in When My Soul Was Undone, which is my chapter poetry book. And that's a journey in itself when you go through the process, or when you read it. It's a very, I guess, insightful process of what I went through. And the journal is a way, I wanted a way for other people to heal. So I created a journal that has writing prompts in it, and it specifically targets what the others' traumas were. And it allows them to heal at their own pace, in their own privacy, because a lot of times people aren't comfortable talking about what they've been through. They don't want to go to a therapist and have that conversation. But I feel like the first step is always telling yourself what happened. And I think that that's the first major move that you can make, because you're not only accepting what happened, but you're accepting the responsibility to do the work and to get through it. And so that's what the journal is all about.
That's awesome. Thank you for capsulizing that so perfectly. So I encourage you all, you can get Marla's book on Amazon, When My Soul Was Undone, and then Self-Love, a 30-day interactive journey. So do yourself a favor. You'll love her work. Marla, before we end, I think we have about 5 minutes left. Just one last words of wisdom for those who have are joining us in the live stream, as well as those who are watching the replay. Just give us some words of that we can really move forward in.
Okay. There's a lot to be said, but I think that the most important thing is that everyone remembers that change isn't something that somebody else is going to do. It's a work that all of us have to do every day. It doesn't end. And doing the inner work is where it's going to really, really start. And once you start with yourself and you start healing yourself and you start doing that step and process, everything else will fall into place. I encourage you all to step into your purpose and into your journey. And I think that doing the inner work is where you will find the answers to these things. You guys are beautiful and you're loved and you will thrive. You just have to find the time to do the inner work.
Awesome. That's awesome so much. Thank you for coming on. For those of you who want to see the community within an unconditional life continue to evolve and grow, follow an unconditional life on Facebook and Instagram as well. Next week, I have an amazing guest. Her name is Tara IJ, and she is a white woman who chose Islam. And the difference between walking out of her house as a white woman versus walking out with a hijab completely changed. She started a revolution, and her story is incredible. And it's all about love for all. So you definitely don't want to miss next week's show. Same place, 8 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Marla, for gracing us with your wisdom, your insight, and the love that you exude. And y'all know what I'm going to say, right? Love is still and always will be the answer. Thank you all for joining, and God bless you all. Take care. All right.